Hey y'all, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Mogi Beth, and for those of y'all who are new here, I am a full-time reseller. Today we are talking about fall trends, but we are in the thick, dense, hot heat of summer, even here in Portland, which is why I've got my smoothie, which is cooling me off. It's from Daily Harvest, and if y'all want to try Daily Harvest, I have a link down in my description. You'll get $25 off your first order. I'm still so obsessed with Daily Harvest. Their smoothies, and especially their bowls. I love their bowls. But anyways, we're in the thick of summer, and the last thing on your mind may be cozy sweaters or wool or plaid or long coats. But as resellers, we really have to keep focus on the next season ahead and start really sourcing and listing for that season at least 1 month in advance. And so if you haven't started sourcing or listing fall items, I would recommend you start now, because in August, customers will start prepping their closets for the colder months ahead. So in order to prepare ourselves for fall, I thought it would be really helpful to review fall trends that I'm projecting are going to be really big this year. And a lot of these trends I'm pulling from fall 2020 runway shows, and also just intuitively how I kind of see fashion heading based off my experience as a reseller for the past 3.5 years. Some of the trends that are projected to be big I didn't include just because I don't think they're going to be big in a reseller market, but I think all of these that I'm going to list today definitely have a place on the reseller market. And I think it's so cool because a lot of these are obviously vintage inspired. Fashion is cyclical. It just comes back in style again and again and again. And so a lot of these are iterations of what we've seen in the past. And so when you're thrifting, you can find really great vintage stuff, or even stuff from like the 1990s or 2000s that are very much on trend today that you can incorporate into your closet and save from the landfill. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So I have over 10 trends, around 12 or so trends, but I've really broken them up into 5 different categories. And those 5 categories are 70s bohemian, 90s grunge, prep school, equestrian chic, and lastly Victorian era inspired. So these 5 categories are the ones that I think are having the biggest influence on fashion today, and I think we see different ways in which they're incorporated, and they're incorporated like simultaneously, which I think is really cool. How I think of fall fashion is really pulling from this 70s bohemian, very kind of eccentric, detail-oriented maximalism, plus the 90s kind of rebellious grunge edge, and then incorporating some structure as well, and then a bit of sophistication with the Victorian era inspired. So I know these are pulling from different sides of the spectrum, but I think that's exactly what fashion does well, is when it pulls from 2 different seemingly opposing worlds, puts them together and creates something beautiful. So let's start with the first category, 70s bohemian, and this is the one I think is having the biggest influence on fashion. There's a Vogue article that is interviewing different editors of international Vogues, and 2 of the editors talk about how much they love 70s. I'll link that down in the description below. But there are tons of different ways I think the 1970s are really influencing what kind of clothing is being made for fall this year. And here are a few different ways, but this is not all inclusive. So number 1 is patchwork. And patchwork has really been trendy for a while, but I feel like it really hasn't been on center stage yet. And I think it would be so cool if really it took more of a center stage in the fall this year. One of the most interesting ways I think patchwork is being incorporated into clothing is leather patchwork jackets and coats. We're seeing that on the runway from people like Todd's and Marnie, but also I was watching Emma Chamberlain's last YouTube video, which was a thrift haul, and she even picked up a leather patchwork coat. So I think this is something to really keep an eye on, because it's not only affecting, you know, the runway, but it's also affecting pretty big influencers. And Emma Chamberlain, if you're not aware of, is definitely a very influential figure in fashion right now, which is, she's like 19, so that's crazy, but she's someone I keep an eye on just because she definitely influences what's in, especially for a younger crowd. The next 70s inspired trend that I think we're going to see a lot of is crochet detail. And again, this was should have been really big in the spring, but not much was really big in the spring except for like COVID and tie-dye sweatpants. but it was supposed to be really big for the spring, but I think it's going to be big for the fall because of that, and because I think it's a really beautiful element that harkens back to the 1970s. We're seeing this from C New York, and of course Ula Johnson, who is one of my favorites, both on the runway for fall 2020 ready to wear. The next way I think the 70s is really going to inspire fall fashion is with shearling or shag jackets and coats. And in the past, we've seen shearling teddy coats, especially if you think of the Max Mara iconic teddy coat, and that is less in style. What's more in style kind of falls into one of two categories. Either, you know, a bomber jacket or some kind of leather jacket with shearling lining and detailing on the collar and on the wrists, or just over the top shag coats, like 1970s eccentric shag. The shearling line coats we're seeing from Dries Van Noten, who I hope I'm pronouncing right. There's actually a really good documentary that I watched on this designer. I'll link that down in the description below. Also from Michael Kors collection, I love this coat. We're seeing it from Longchamp, which is gorgeous. And then shag, which is actually like all over the runway for fall 2020. I think two of the best examples of what that kind of means was represented by Stella McCartney with this coat, and then this coat from Miu Miu. But again, this isn't like a fully extensive list of the different ways 70s is inspiring fall fashion this year, but I think these are three really distinct ways in which we're seeing it happen. Okay, so the next category I want to talk about is 90s grunge and 90s fashion, but primarily today we are going to talk about 90s grunge because the 90s have been here for a while. I mean, the 90s and 80s have really been super influential in fashion for the past couple of years. Think of dad shoes, mom jeans, skinny little glasses, scrunchies, all have come back in style. But I think now we're gonna see a little bit more of a harder edge from the 90s and that 90s grunge era. So the two ways I see this really coming into play is with a big emphasis on combat boots and then an emphasis on kind of oversized rigid denim. So with combat boots, of course, you think about Doc Martens, and I think Doc Martens are definitely going to be trendy for this fall. And they have been for a while, of course, but I think especially if you can find Doc Martens to resell, this year would be a really good year to do so. But a bunch of different brands are coming out with similar styles. So if you find a vintage pair of combat boots, I think it might be worth picking up and trying out, just because I really think these are going to be big for fall. Here is actually a pair of Doc Martens that I really, really want. And they actually kind of, I think, nod to the 70s a little bit because it has that chunky heel and that just kind of color of leather I think looks kind of 70s, but I really, really want those boots. I've been wanting them for a while. And then the other trend that I want to talk about, denim, I think we've seen rigid denim be really popular for a while now, and rigid denim means 100% cotton, no stretch denim. And so brands like a Goldie, Girlfriend Denim, Silver Lake, Levi's are all really popular right now because they make a lot of non-stretch denim. I think the slight shift we're gonna see, and we're seeing, is that instead of kind of the skinny rigid denim, I think we're gonna see more of kind of the looser fit denim, which to me nods to that 90s grunge era and just 90s in general. I keep thinking of this photo of Janet Jackson from 1992, and she kind of has these like large oversized high-rise rigid denim jeans on that are kind of being cinched with a belt, but the denim itself is kind of like just oversized and kind of slouchy. And so that's what I kind of think we're gonna see a lot of this year. And here are a few examples of that. There's this redone Pixie Levinson collab jeans that are on Net-a-Porter that I'll pop up a picture of here. And as you can see, they're not super skinny or tapered. They're more of that kind of looser straight leg fit. And then the Goldie 90s jeans I think is going to be more popular. And then this pair by Isabel Marant I think really kind of shows from the runway perspective kind of that slouchier denim as well. If you think, put 90s grunge over here, another kind of element that I think fall fashion is pulling from is prep school, which feels like the other end of the spectrum, but I think when you mesh them together it kind of just comes off as like this prep school kid who's rebelling against the system, and I think that kind of vibe or that kind of aesthetic is really in right now. This is coming into play in a few different ways. Plaid mini skirts are really in, sweater vests are really in, even wearing sweater vests as just a shirt, and then oversized collegiate sweatshirts or some kind of sweatshirt with collars popping out of it, I think is really in right now as well. And we're seeing this kind of prep school aesthetic from a few different people on the fall 2020 runway. One being Christian Dior, another big one was D Squared, and then Gucci as well. And then the next category that I see fall trends really gravitating toward is equestrian chic. And I think Elle magazine kind of summarized this up really well by saying we're seeing less Western and more Westchester. And what that means is less of the cowgirl aesthetic, less of the Southwestern aesthetic, and more of the equestrianism, refined, sophisticated horseback rider, competitive horseback rider. I love this trend. I think it's really interesting to see the different ways that designers are incorporating it. One of the biggest ways I see it appearing on the runway is with tall riding boots up to your knee or above your knee, and then kind of having a pleated pant tucked into that. And so you kind of have a more billowy pant tucked into a very skinny boot. I think that's such a really pretty look, and you see that from designers like Tory Burch and Hermes. I absolutely love Tory Burch's fall 2020 runway this year. And then I think that the equestrian aesthetic is being incorporated into fashion this fall in other ways as well. I think the structuring of that equestrian look is definitely going to be in, if you think of that tight riding pant with the oversized blazer. And then you see it just showing up in just general influences and different runway shows that include Chanel, Victoria Beckham, Etro, and self-portrait. But I'm really excited to see the different ways that this equestrian influence shows up, whether it's leather trim or harness hardware or more of a equestrian type of print on clothing. I'm really excited and curious to see how and if people incorporate it into their wardrobe. Okay, so the last category of trends that I want to cover is one that has been around for a while now, but is still very much prevalent, and I hope doesn't go away anytime soon because it's maybe my favorite, and that is the Victorian era inspiration. The most obvious way that we're still seeing this today is with the oversized voluminous puffed sleeve. And I think designers are still having a lot of fun playing around with this trend. There's a ton of different ways that voluminous sleeves can really be incorporated into a garment. So we're seeing this on the runway in really interesting ways from designers like Fendi, which did, I think, a lace version, and then Rodarte, which was absolutely gorgeous, and then from Jill Sander. I thought this was a really cool one as well. And this is a trend that I personally really love and like to wear, and I think a lot of people do too. It definitely makes a statement while still remaining very sophisticated and wearable. But then the other Victorian inspired trend I see a lot of on the runway is Victorian florals, which I think is a little bit different. If you watched my trends video from last year, I talked about dark moody florals, and Victorian florals are definitely much lighter, much more elevated, and much more delicate. So examples of Victorian florals that we're seeing on the runway are from Zimmermann, and then again from Tory Burch. And I love this trend. I think Victorian florals is definitely, I think especially if you mix it with something from the 70s or something from the 90s grunge aesthetic, it can be a really cool clash and contrast, which I think is so beautiful. So anyways, those are all the trends that I wanted to talk about today, but of course I didn't cover all of them. So if there are any that I missed that you are especially excited about, let me know in the comments down below. I'm super curious to hear your thoughts on this topic because I love discussing this topic. But again, if you aren't sourcing for fall yet, get out there, go in the sweaters, go in the coats, pick up some boots, and start incorporating that into your closet because you'll thank yourself in a few weeks. All right, well, thanks so much for being here. I will see y'all in the next one. Love y'all. Bye. I almost forgot, check out our other videos over here, And then if you haven't already, y'all, please subscribe. You can click on my logo up here and it will help you subscribe. Click the bell notification if you want to be notified every time we put out new videos, and give us a thumbs up on this video. All right, bye.